My name is Patricia Close. 2 years ago, I proposed to Orion Public Radio an audio series about the award-winning actor George Fordham. I eventually spent several days with George talking about his career, his acting method, even his childhood. One day, as we drove around his hometown of Tracy, Minnesota, he said he wanted to visit his old high school, as he hadn't been there in almost 30 years. It was there that he began to tell the strange story which comprises the entirety of this documentary. It took some time to get the entire tale, as George would only return to it with some reluctance, though more and more the sense of unburdening was undeniable. I believe it resulted in a more enduring work than was originally released, even if I may never release this one publicly. To effectively convey the full story of George's friend, Cooper Rabin, required an additional year of researching letters and emails pertaining to what happened between the years 1993 to 2021. Correspondence I have narrated here. Though it seemingly has no relevance to the story, it is interesting to note one particular aspect of the collectible card game George Fordham mentions, called Spectral Core. The game has, as its main component, hundreds of strange cards bearing lurid, vivid illustrations of demons and spirits and monsters, capering and lunging and emerging from the shadows to haunt the players' minds.
Okay, so right here, I swear to God, I wrote a smart-ass essay in the newspaper, the school paper, begging the principal to fix the lean in this goalpost. This was the one where the scoreboard is. And it has been 31 years, and look at it. You have got to find the original photo of it we ran in the paper and compare it to this. There is not 5 degrees of difference in the lean. Damn you, Mr. Marsh, you are worthless. Actually, he was like 90 back then, so actually I apologize.
That's me in the case, drama club. Check out that haircut. That is me rocking James Spader in less than 0, I think.
Were you popular with the girls?
That was more first year of college. No, I did all right.
Who did you go to the prom with?
Oh, God. That is a story. Okay, that is a story.
I had my snazzy light blue tux, right? We're walking to the car, and she lets me have it right there. As soon as her parents are out of earshot. She didn't even get in. She dumped me right on the spot. But, she caught me. I had lied to her. She goes right back inside. It lasted 2 minutes. So I'm just dazed. I don't know what to do. I start driving around, and I wind up at Capitello's in the light blue tux. I just want a bad turkey sub and then to disappear, basically.
So you never went to prom?
No. I'm standing at the counter, and I see this guy in the corner, Cooper Rabin. I had one class with him. We never spoke, except the week before he had to share his book with me because I forgot mine.
Which class?
American government. We kind of saw each other, and he was no one really knew him. He was one of those kids who didn't have any personality. I hate to say it. He wasn't a nerd. He wasn't a jock. He wasn't a goth, a brain. He had no group. He had no friends. He wore these clothes like he was intent on being totally invisible. So we were kind of on opposite sides of the popularity spectrum. But on prom night, I was messed up. And all I could think about, of course, was, oh my God, people are going to be talking about me on Monday. And I have playoffs against Chester Park on Tuesday. So I went over and I said hi to him. And I think I said I was sorry for getting his name wrong in front of the entire class. And I basically slid down in the booth with my feet sticking out. And we kind of talked a little bit as I waited for my food, he was sitting there with his milkshake, and he was playing this card game by himself. And at that time, I didn't have the imagination to understand that kind of thing. To me, it was, oh, this Cooper is one of those sci-fi fantasy guys. Oh, wow, that's so weird. But he knew I was dating Lee, so I told him what happened. It felt kind of good to tell someone I didn't know. And I wound up offering him a ride home.
What did we talk about? Well, I got that he really didn't like his father. His father had basically forced him out that night. He'd been up in his bedroom playing his game, and his father was kind of like lurking in the hallway, and he said, it's prom night. Do you maybe at least want to go out with your friends? So Cooper had slunk out, hating life. He walked all the way to Cupatello's, past the tire outlet and the bowling alley and the donut shops. His dad had actually gotten out of jail 6 months before, tax fraud. 3 years he was away, and Cooper had to go live with his grandmother. And my dad had died in September, so we talked about that stuff. And then he was like, hey, we have a ton of ice cream. Do you want to come in?
How did your father die?
Took his own life. He'd been living in Madison. My parents were divorced for years.
So, how does it work?
God, it's been how many decades since he showed me? But it was like you gathered your monsters or your demons from the deck into these clans, and you staged these battles. By about 8 o'clock, he taught me up pretty good, but I couldn't win a battle against Cooper. He was on it. He knew that game inside out. We were having a pretty good time in the kitchen, though, but I never took my tux jacket off. I swear I had it on the whole time.
What time did you leave?
Not till like 10. We were up in his room, and I was trying to get him to tell me. This girl had talked to him in class. This girl, Belle Camuto, real quiet, kind of wore this back brace. I was trying to get him to tell me exactly what she said to him, because I was pretty sure she'd actually asked him to the prom, and he didn't even realize it. Cooper was that kind of guy. Nothing good could possibly happen. Oh, no. It was, me trying to coach him up a little bit about girls. But I was wiped out. I left. I don't know. I don't know if I should tell about Cooper. I probably shouldn't say much.
We can always...
Well, it was strange. So I'm on my way out of the bedroom, and he goes, hey, before you leave, can you do me a favor and give me those pennies from the chair there? And I look down, and I don't see anything. There's just the one chair in the room. But he points. He's like, there, those right there. And I said, you mean the pennies from Mars that don't exist? And he looked very sad all of a sudden. He said he was sorry. He said something weird had been happening to him recently. I should just forget it. And I left, but that moment was so awkward, that silence. I didn't know what had just happened. His mind had slipped 2 grooves or something. And I figured I'd see him at graduation, but he didn't go. He had to go to summer school, it turned out. His grades sucked. He just didn't care about anything. So that was my prom night, a 3-hour friendship, which I never even mentioned to my other friends. That was the kind of lousy teenager I was back then.
And then you graduated, so you never saw him again?
Well, I don't know. Maybe we'll talk about that. Maybe.
October 2nd, 1993. Kingsford. My flight from JFK was delayed, but I made it across the pond okay. I drove to see Claire Yelletts today at the mansion. She'd sent me a message that she was dying. It rained and rained. She won't be getting up from her bed ever again, but she was having a good day. She told me an attorney is going to call us after she's gone, and we're going to be getting a lot of money. It's all meant to go to a foundation she wants us to set up, so that what happened to her husband won't happen to anyone else without someone at least understanding, or attempting to, His nightmares are apparently still a constant, but he doesn't seem to want to harm himself, and she's really very grateful to us. It's going to be about $300,000. We can talk about this when I get back from Ireland. My first concern is how we're going to go about keeping a foundation like this quiet year after year. Sometimes I imagine the future of the internet, and I can see it becoming a real problem. You'll be interested to know that all the rooms on that side of the mansion where it all happened are still exactly as they were 2 years ago. Claire left them in that state. It's eerie to see them in the daylight. The paint everywhere looks even more red somehow, and you notice more of the objects her husband soaked with it when he went insane. You notice how he got every single inch of every corner, the light switches, the piano keys, the drapes, all a screaming red. It's a museum of madness. But no more sounds from inside the walls, at least. They're gone. Or so she says. Signed, Agatha.
After the audition miracle, I was doing American Buffalo here at the Cherry Lane Theater, and my nephew was attending some Spectral Core Expo event thing about 2 blocks from where I was getting coaching during the day to flatten out my upper Midwest accent.
What year was this?
98. The expo, the tournament was going on right down on Houston. So after coaching one day, I walked down there to the Radisson or whatever, and they were just finishing up. The whole thing was petering out. So I got there just in time, and there he was. There was Cooper, skinnier even than he used to be. And he'd won the tournament, of course. I forget how much money it was, but it wasn't bad. I know. It was more than I was making. And I think he just barely recognized me. So it was a little awkward at first, but he did warm up, and he asked me if I wanted to see his little RV. He was driving around the country, tournament to tournament in this RV. And I thought, hell yeah, I want to see an RV. He was parked like right over there in the corner. It was a wee little thing all by itself. Great atmosphere in here, right? But we sat there for a bit with root beer or something. We reminisced a little. He never graduated. He left home during the summer, and he figured if he got really, really good at one thing, maybe he could get somewhere. Never saw his family anymore. I was the one who brought up prom night. I had a dream about it a month before. It was basically a recreation of the night, except it was just the part where we were talking about girls. And I was headed back home. In the dream, he said something about marbles on a chair. And in the dream, I was saying, "Are you insane? We have to get you to a hospital." And he said, this is in real life, in the RV, he said it was pennies. It was pennies. And I said, right. In the dream, he morphed into a devil or something right off a Spectral Core card. And I ran into the ocean. And that's when he told me, as we sat there, that something was happening to him back then. He asked me if he could tell me something he'd never told anybody else, nobody ever. Before I came over, he'd been seeing weird things for about 8 months. He was seeing pennies. Around his house, they'd just appear. 11 of them, a group of 11. Like they'd be on a table in a circle or even on a wall sometimes, but he couldn't feel them. He would reach out his hand, but when he got close, they would disappear. And that kept happening. It had never stopped. And he'd been seeing them ever since. In the RV there, or when he stayed in a hotel once in a while, or just, doing daily stuff. Outdoors a couple of times. 11 pennies, always 11. So I asked him if he'd ever been checked out. He said that was the first thing he'd ever spent any money on, was going to a doctor. He went to 3 of them.
How often did he see the pennies?
About every week, 2 weeks or so. He said sometimes they were in different patterns. They were on the ceiling once. They just vanish if he was about to touch them. And sometimes he could feel something happen before he saw them. Not always. It felt like someone had come into the room just halfway.
But he never saw what it was.
No. He couldn't take a picture of the pennies either. They just weren't there. That's what he said.
What?
He was scared it wasn't ever going to go away. He'd just seen the pennies again at a rest stop, driving into town, on the sink in his bathroom. Old dates, too. Old dates from the 20s or before. So we could tell it was always the same group of pennies.
What was your reaction to this?
Politeness? I mean, I was the only one he knew personally that he'd told, which was, he still didn't have any friends. But I was going to go back to my life, and he was going to go on to Cleveland, so it felt okay to him. We weren't going to hang out. He just wanted to tell someone, finally. He'd been more scared than normal the last few months.
How come?
He didn't say. He did say he'd gotten in touch into this group. They investigated stuff like this. He'd been going back and forth with them for a while. So I asked him as many questions as I was comfortable with, but finally I gave him my card and said, hey, call me sometime. Let me know what happens. I hope you get through this.
Did you really want to know?
No.
From Time Out, September 7th, 1998. For those who want a little edge to their evening, Cherry Lane Theater's production of David Mamet's American Buffalo, running through November 15th, is a can't miss. Director Tony Groh's minimalist production puts the spotlight squarely on the Pulitzer Prize-winning and hyper-real dialogue is delivered by three splendid actors, Larry Pine as Teach and Roscoe Lee Brown as Donnie, playing off newcomer George Fordham, whose embodiment of the naive character of Bobby has more comedic thrust than any portrayal we've seen before.
George, I thought I'd try out your email address. It was cool that you came by the hotel. I feel bad because I didn't tell you about something that happened last year. It was the thing that scared me and kind of changed things. I told the group that's looking into my case, but nobody else. Anyway, I don't want you to think I'm Looney Tunes or paranoid. A lot of people are jerks and wouldn't even bother with me. That's why I hated high school so much. But you're a pretty good friend. I won't abuse your email or anything, don't worry. I don't like email that much anyway. But I'll tell you the details. It happened right after my father died, and the house got taken by the bank. His father died, and to cover his debts, the bank was going to have an estate sale. And they said to Cooper, okay, you can go in the day before and take whatever you want that's yours and doesn't have a blue tag. Just make whatever arrangements you need to. So he's alone in the house. It's like 11 at night. He hasn't been there in a few years. But all his stuff is just like he left it, the posters and the CDs and everything. He's walking through and he goes into his parents' bedroom and into the closet. They kept some of his old things in there, this big plastic chest from when he was a kid. So he kneels down and he starts going through that. And behind him, the closet door slams shut hard. He turns around and he sees pennies jammed into the crack in a line where the door meets the frame. He turns the knob, he pushes on the door, he can't get out. The pennies are wedged so tight in there, the door won't open. So what does he do? He goes to pry them out, but they're not there. He starts yanking on the door, he's pushing on it, he starts throwing his entire weight against it, nothing works. He's in the closet, he's trapped in there. He starts backing up, running at the door. No way that thing should not have opened, but it didn't. Bam, again and again, bam, terrified. He slumps down. He eventually goes to sleep. Around dawn, he finally kicks his way out of it, destroys the door, goes down the hall, falls asleep on the top of his old bed. Nothing like that had ever happened before. It's funny, but I was kind of used to the pennies lever by then. Now, I don't know. The people who are looking into this all for me are expensive, and they've told me some interesting things. Signed, Cooper. He'd be in a tournament every 2 weeks. He won about half of them, so if you do the math, it was enough to get by on, definitely. He was doing okay.
What was the Walmart thing you were talking about?
Well, he would park there a lot of nights, whatever town he was in. He'd park at Walmart overnight, if not a campground. So he was in Cincinnati. He's parked. It's real late. He's alone in there in the RV, a little RV. He has almost a full bed in there. It's in the corner. I remember seeing it. And he gets into it like normal. And I'm trying to, how did he describe it? He could sort of see himself in the reflection of the window there. And only about 5 minutes after he got into bed, he thought he saw something in the reflection, something behind him, a shape. But instead of getting up, he just squeezed his eyes shut. And then he felt something in the bed with him for the first time. Not something getting into it. It was just suddenly there, some presence, almost tight against his back. And he leapt out of the bed and he just got out of the RV. That was the first time, too, I think, that he had said something. After all those years, he finally said, "Who are you?" Nothing. And he spent like 2 hours wandering the aisles of Walmart trying not to think about it. And then another hour or so just watching the RV from the curb across the parking lot. He didn't go back in there till sunrise. It was right around then that he started to get really scared.
October 10th, 2002. Hello, Mrs. Fordham. Just a note to let you know that your daughter's behavior this week has been fine. What you're really looking for is patterns of poor adjustment over time. And I still do think I see a bit of a pattern with Olive. 5 is such an unpredictable age, and she might be very different 6 months from now. So, again, it's just something to keep in mind, and I'll try to observe her interactions with other kids as best I can. To answer your husband's question about how early I've gotten a sense of which children are going to be socially okay and which might not be, there's really no particular age I can define. Keep in mind I'm not a trained child psychologist. We can discuss this more next Friday. Thanks. Signed, Lisa Roth.
Okay, so this is MacArthur Street. I didn't know it was just one block off Main. I really didn't. And that's 110 right back there. All right. We just went past it. So I lived 4 blocks from Bell ever since elementary school. I had no idea. But she didn't go to our bus stop, right? So that essentially she was a citizen of a different universe. That's how kids work. 4 blocks. It was actually the toughest time because I kept getting parts and having to fly out west, and we didn't want to take Olive out of school. I was really worried about her. Too much, maybe. And we finally just had to. It was all out in Los Angeles for me. And then when House of the Long Winter came along, that was it. There was no more for me here. I moved my mother out there. I was exhausted all the time. I would lie there kind of hoping the movie would fail and I could just teach acting at Twin Cities, stay here. But that page had turned. And then Belle called me one day.
How'd she find you?
My mother gave her the number for my agency. I was literally in my manager's office when she called. Otherwise, she might never have gotten through. The receptionist there said, Mr. Fordham, I think there's a phone call for you. I picked up and she goes, hi, do you remember me? My name is Belle. It's okay if you don't. I can hang up. She asked me if I was still in touch with Cooper, but it had been a couple of years. Some email I sent him bounced back. We talked a little bit. Really, she wanted to get together and talk about him a bit. And I was headed back here to finalize some house stuff, so I said okay. And we swapped email addresses, but I had no idea what it was actually going to be about.
What did you remember about her?
Not a whole lot. She's a low talker, you know. I had to ask her to speak up a lot. And at first I thought she said Michelle instead of Belle. It's so confused. The conversation was kind of a mess, but we got it sorted out. This is the locally infamous Cupatello's. As you can see, I was not lying. That's how big they cut the fries. So they're always going to be undercooked in this center every time. But this is where we met up. She came in and she still had the back brace from high school. Still had it. She was always trying to hide it back then. T-shirts down to her knees. When we met up, she was working down at the grocery store on Vanner, night shift. She'd brought a sandwich with her. We both got shakes, but she sat down and unwrapped this BLT she'd brought from home, so she hadn't changed, really.
Did you talk about anything other than Cooper?
Well, that's the only thing we had in common, so no. She kind of got in touch with him through a forum a year before to ask him how he was doing and stuff. Turns out she did have a little crush on him in high school, just like Cooper and I had talked about. She never told anyone because nobody seemed to like him much, but he was nice to her. So over this forum, they just played Stargate online forever. Starcraft. And then they wound up having kind of a date when he was here. It was between his tournaments. And she said it was pretty bad. I could imagine what a date for the two of them would have been like. Apparently, it was very awkward, both of them really nervous. And at the end of it, he just started telling her everything about the pennies. It all came out of him in this rush. So she didn't know if he was interested in her or just wanted someone to tell the story to. She was sitting right where you are, and she imitated what Cooper's face did when they separated at the door over there. It was so sad. He must have realized he'd screwed up horribly. I mean, kind of like he'd done with me. My little theory is that it was this kind of separation anxiety. Cooper was so convinced he wasn't interesting to anybody that when he sensed he was about to be abandoned, he just started uncontrollably saying the thing that would make him different, special, which was his haunting. She'd been completely weirded out. So of course I told her I knew the whole story, but there was more to it, it turned out. He'd been spending a lot of money on these people he would only give her vague details about when they talked on the phone. They'd been allegedly trying to piece things together for him. They'd made him keep a journal of everything he saw and heard for months and months. Longer than that, actually. That presence he felt sometimes, they thought it was a woman. Based on little things like the arrangement of some fashion magazines in a bookstore once when he went in there.
How did that work?
Well, they were in a kind of pattern that was sort of duplicated in the lobby of a hotel about a month later. Like the faces were
grouped in some kind of... Anyway, these were the kinds of things they had him write down religiously. They told him that the presence might be trying to express to him what she looked like.
Wow.
And where the pennies were placed, too. Certain surfaces, certain kinds of surfaces more than others, was maybe suggesting a feminine source. Belle had tried to keep up the phone calls, but he was on the road again, and she sensed he was fading out, and he was still scared. She thought these people he was dealing with kept asking him for more and more money. Cooper had sent her a picture of the stack of notebooks they'd made him keep. She said it was really disturbing. And again, I was just not sure of what I was supposed to do. She gave me his email address, and I said, well, this bounced back. But then I actually looked at it. I actually really looked, and it couldn't have been more obvious what had happened. I just transposed a couple of letters. I knew it right away. I think that was a passive-aggressive maneuver on my part, not looking.
Because you were wanting an excuse to cut him off?
Exactly. She never thought Cooper was super good looking or anything. She said he sat sort of diagonally from her in English class. They never really talked, but she borrowed a pencil from him a couple of times because he would always have 3 pencils next to his notebook. Exactly 3. I knew that, like he was expecting to have to write a novel in class or something. And she remembered the second time she asked, he gave her this really fancy one, super sharp, brand new, like he'd been hoping she'd ask again, and he had this special little thing for her, all prepared.
You didn't have to say yes to meeting her, but you did.
Oh God, I felt so bad. You know, I had said some nasty things about her back in the day. The stuff you say because, I don't know, you're 17, you're just saying anything that'll get you more approval from whoever's in the room, right? Maybe the quarterback will laugh, or maybe the cute girl will laugh. But I have this vivid memory that Belle overheard me one time. It was in the cafeteria. I didn't know she was there till I said what I said. Some stupid, mean joke about her brace or her hair.
You always seem to play someone who's outcast so accurately.
Yeah, because I was Cooper. I was Belle, one layer beneath. That was totally who I was going into junior high school. And I don't know, I found the switch that turned me into the popular kid. I flipped that sucker on. It was self-defense, I guess. All I was doing was covering up the insecurity, but man, I did it well. And I would get mad at people like them. I would think, why can't they find that switch and be normal? Am I the only one who's faking everything every day?
June 20th, 2002. A few weeks ago, I had a super bad dream. I was sitting in a tiny room at the top of an old house near the ocean. Outside the window, you could see whaling ships out in the fog. A woman was sitting across from me at a little table beside the window, but she was hiding her face. She was reaching across the table and tapping my arm with the point of a quill pen from olden times, starting at my hand and working up to my elbow, tapping a line, and every time she tapped, I screamed because the point of the quill pen was so hot it burned me. When I woke up, I felt the pennies. My arm was sticking out over the bed, and I saw them there, lined up on it. I shook them off me, but I could still feel the burning for a whole minute. Sorry I didn't call back last month, but thanks for checking in. I got second place in the Manchester Expo, which would have been a big deal if I won first. I got beat by a 16-year-old kid. I can't believe you're getting so famous. I have a lot of questions about how they did the effects in Mission 6860. Haha. No effects in that kissing scene with that woman who won the award, I bet. Ha. The critics are stupid. Don't worry about them.
Thank you. I hadn't seen that movie in a lot of years. This was a tough part. It was over my head. So thank you to Melanie Davis for giving it to me. As usual, my mimicry of better actors got me through it. On day 10 or so of filming, I said to Melanie, I'm so lost. I don't know who I'm supposed to be. She said, well, yeah, that's kind of obvious. But she said, every time we start a take, there are 20 people around you on the set. And all of them like you. I like you. When you show up for work here, you're not alone. And that's so important.
October 14th, 2002. Kingsford. An interesting visit to Mr. V in regards to Cooper Rabin. Mr. V never comes out of the archives, I found out, so don't bother trying to coax him. He's unnaturally intense, the kind of intense I know we need, but which frightens me a little. He found a historian in Maine who'd uncovered a book of children's games published in 1931, some small regional press. One of the games in there was called Market Day. It was a very simple thing played with exactly 11 pennies on a wooden board. An adaptation of an old Welsh game. The book even mentions that a woman invented it. She died in 1889. She was a school teacher. Absolutely no other biographical information on her can be found, not even a name, according to Mr. V, and I believe him. He believes the repetition of the pattern that Rabin sees means that the spirit is having trouble communicating, and always will. It simply can't push through any more clearly than it has, and this will never stop. I have Krista telling me that Rabin is getting more desperate and is on antidepressants now. But I'll be in Albany looking into this business with the Poldricht house, so I'm hoping you'll be able to find someone to conference in with him, since it's been more than 2 months since anyone did. The last time we talked, he stopped in the middle of the conversation. He said, I hear something. He thought he was sensing something in the room at that very moment. Somehow, those 10 seconds of silence on the line with 3 of us listening in 1,000 miles away is the most frightening thing I've experienced in all the years I've been doing this. Finally, he started talking again. Attached are my notes about his experience with something standing right behind him late at night on the platform at a train station. I would categorize this one as an aggression, if only because of the timeline. See if you agree. I can't help but feel something is building there to some kind of conclusion. After Albany, I'll be needing an operation for my back. I'll be 52 in 2 weeks, and all of the running around is catching up to me. I may need some time away soon. I'm sorry to let you down. Agatha.
I did what I did, which I think of now as the bad thing, because I could, because it was financially easy. And I thought Cooper was being preyed on, I really did. And you're going to have to help me out with what year this was. It was the year the superhero movie came out. And part of the reason, in the back of my mind, very small reason, that I did that one was to keep up some connection between us, because he'd been fading again. We both were. To be honest, I knew he liked those movies a lot, so maybe at some point I figured, okay, we can talk about something. There was no money left in Spectral Core in the US, so we had to go around Europe to make ends meet. And as uncomfortable as he was traveling here, I can only imagine how much he hated being in unfamiliar countries. He'd leave me a message every 6 months or so, or send an email, and I'd reply, and that was the end of it.
How did it start, the bad thing?
Just searching the internet for these researcher people he'd hooked up with, trying everything I could think of, but very fast. It was all dead ends. And then I thought I noticed a pattern to the dead ends, like the dead ends were being manufactured. I never spent any time on the internet if I didn't have to. I didn't know the best way to investigate what these people were doing. I didn't know any of their names. Cooper had accidentally given me one phrase in an email to go by, and that got me farther than I thought, frankly, but you ran into dead ends a lot quicker in, 2001, 2002? So I had to hand it over, and a sound guy I knew put me in touch with someone. And when he started to strike out, he said, okay, look, if you really want to find these people, you have to get serious. And I said, yeah, let's get serious. Cooper was never going to help me out. So I kept it all from him.
How long did it take you to find the group?
A couple of years. Well, a year and a half. And when they got found, they started to fight back very quickly. I didn't know a lot of what was going on because I had some degrees of separation, but they got aggressive. I just didn't realize how aggressive my guy had gotten. I wrote him checks. That was my participation. I said, the minute it seems like this should be a police thing, we'll go with that. But they were so clever. Their people were so clever. Dummy domain names and dummy networks and addresses and fake tax documents and I don't know what else. A lot of technical detail I could never understand. And the next thing I know, we're in the middle of this war online with people whose names were still completely cloaked. The more they cloaked themselves and the better they got at it, the angrier I got. The more convinced I was that they were committing a fraud against Cooper. And I thought, I'm going to put a stop to this before he winds up in a mental hospital. It was just an extension of high school bullying. That's what they were doing. So this was how I was justifying it. So then one night, me and Michelle and my daughter are in Bethany Beach. This is an ocean town. Michelle grew up there, so we got into the habit of going every other summer for about a week or so. Things were really shaky between all of us then, so that year we made sure we went. I get a call in the condo Saturday night. This guy says his name is Maxwell. He's speaking for the people I've been trying to confront for the last year and a half. His exact words. I have no idea how he could have gotten my number. He says, please, you need to be aware that we know you're behind the attempt to hack our private network. And before you commit another crime, we are willing to meet with you one time to discuss the problem. And I was like, oh my God.
Did you know what he was talking about?
I knew what he was talking about. I'm immediately picturing myself in jail because I'd let this go too far. So this Maxwell says, I am here in Bethany Beach. Please meet me at such and such address in Ocean City. That's just down Route 1. The next day at 1 o'clock. He was physically in Bethany Beach. He tracked me down. I didn't sleep at all. I figured I had to go. It rained the next day. It was pouring down rain. I tell Michelle I'm going to go load us up on groceries. The address was in this trailer park in the middle of Ocean City. These are all weekly, monthly rentals because the beach is 3 blocks away. So go figure how they got such sudden access to one of these dinky trailers that you have to book 3 months in advance. I knock on the door, I go in, and there's this guy sitting in the trailer. He's this big, stout, muscled, tan guy, maybe 30. Looks like he just flew in from Santa Monica, $100 haircut, wearing this green t-shirt. Ocean City, Maryland, with a frog wearing sunglasses. Like he bought it that day from Sensations. He shakes my hand. He's completely polite. He's all alone. We sit down. This is Maxwell, okay? Maxwell's not the head of whatever operation they have going. He says he's down the chain. He goes, we have to make something clear. This harassment needs to end today. He says they won't press charges as long as I back off. And he says he hopes I'll be assuaged after I hear him out. I remember that word choice, assuaged. So this is not some low-end cloak and dagger guy I'm talking to. He says, we're sitting there at a table that folds out from the wall in this trailer with the rain pounding down on top of it. He says, you have to understand that what we do, and again, he's not giving me any names, what we do is incredibly difficult and incredibly expensive, and it needs to be done in complete secrecy. There are experts to consult and evidence to be analyzed and travel and greater pains for confidentiality than any military operation, and it all costs money. There's no way around it. He says, if I don't believe that their intention is to help my friend, then he will show me something to make me believe it. But there is not to be one instance of further prying into them. And if there is one further instance, he says, they will know about it. And he opens a folder and he gives me some sheets of paper. They have, whoever these people are, they have documented every search me and the guy I hired ever made for them online in the last 6 months. It's a printout. Is it factual? I don't know. I assume it is. So I give him my peace of mind there. I am thoroughly pissed off. I probably went on for 10 minutes about Cooper's mental state and so forth. And Maxwell, Mr. Universe here, is nodding, very polite, very understanding. He knows the whole story, but he's not backing down. I'm sitting there thinking he's done this before. And I think I probably pushed too hard because I think I verbally threatened him, because he takes another folder from the seat beside him. And he says, okay, I'm going to show this to you so you'll understand us better.
Do you want to pick this up tomorrow?
No, I'll tell it. He says, in this folder is everything we know about what your father went through 6 years after his separation from your mother. My jaw is hanging there. He says, we know all of it because he came to us. Now, before I even process that this total stranger is talking about my father, my dead father, I see that this folder is this thick. My father had been alone in a museum sometime long after the divorce and moving away to Madison. A busy Sunday in a history museum. And he'd been standing near a train car that at one time it had taken prisoners to a slave labor camp in Siberia somewhere. An actual train car that had become an exhibit.
Mr. F had been standing there by himself when he saw people start to come out of the side of the train car. Men, women, and children who were dressed in rags like peasants or prisoners. They filed past him slowly without speaking, each looking at his face, and they disappeared down a long hallway that led out of the museum. They never said a word, so Mr. F thought that because of their authentic appearance, it was part of a strange recreation. No one else seemed to notice them. Late that same night, Mr. F was alone in his apartment when he heard a scratching at his door, like someone was trying to get in or pick the lock without making too much noise. He described feeling feverish and very afraid. Opening the door, he saw almost 24 people standing out in the cold. They were the ones he had seen at the museum. He closed the door hurriedly and retreated to his bedroom. But then, an hour later, the scratching began again. This report continues on page 7. Do not scan or copy. Permission to remove it from the premises must be attained through Kingsford Harvey.
4 months or so he was supposedly haunted by these people. Sometimes they would come back in the middle of the night, not knocking, trying to pick their way in. All these small hands. He never told anyone, he just suffered with it. The museum people were the end of it for him. He couldn't take it. He took a bunch of pills. This was what was in the file. Maxwell says, we're trying to save your friend's life. Do you know how extraordinary and unlikely it is that a man, Cooper, who is frequented by a presence, happens to know someone whose father died because of that? The unbelievable geographical rarity of that. We're trying to find out what that means, if it means anything. Do you know how rare it is that Cooper's ordeal has gone on for so long? We're trying to save his life, and not just his. Please, let us try.
It was that night. I remember the water being about as calm as this. There was no one else around on the beach that I saw. I was standing here, wondering what I was going to do. Michelle and Olive were in the condo. I saw something in the sand. It was this circle of tiny objects embedded in the sand where the tide had smoothed things out. I went over and I knew what they were. I knew it. I was counting them as I walked over. 11. I looked up and there was someone standing on the beach, right over there, right on the tide line, watching me. A woman. But when I looked back at the sand, the pennies weren't what I thought they were. And there weren't 11 of them. They were shells. Some kid had maybe left them there in a circle. And the woman was just, someone out walking. But I was in a cold sweat. That was, 2004. Another long stretch of silence. And then March of 2006, I got another call from Belle late at night. She was crying. She was trying to calm herself. She was saying they found Cooper. A farmer found him. A goat farm. He was unconscious. He was beaten. The farmer was painting a well and he looked up and Cooper was bleeding and staggering. He collapsed. I got to add something about that night on the beach. The second time I looked over at that woman, sometimes I am convinced that it was a different image. The body type was different. Like in 5 seconds, she'd been replaced because I saw someone I shouldn't have. And I know that doesn't make sense that I would see someone Cooper had not. I just thought I'd tell you. Cooper had been out walking a trail just before dark. This was in York County, Pennsylvania. And a storm had blown in from out of absolutely nowhere without any prediction. The sky had become like, he saw 4 funnels, 4 distinct funnels above him, completely silent. They had color to them, strange color. The wind started whipping around and he started to run. He was trying to find shelter. And then he said, here came the pennies, raining down hard on him, like being in a tornado. He put his hands over his eyes and he kept going, and they started coming at him from an angle, all angles, like they were being shot at him, thousands of them. He heard him hitting the branches of trees on the way down over the sound of the wind. branch hit him in the head, and he passed out for a few seconds. Then he got up, and one of the pennies hit his eye socket, and it filled up with blood. So finally I flew out to see him, like more than a week later. It was terrible timing. I was in the middle of the divorce. So that's the actual story of why the play was stopped for a little while. That's the actual truth. I got to the hospital. He's been recovering for 8 or 9 days already. I walk in, bruises all over him. His arms, his neck, his face, his legs. 3 broken bones, all small ones. Bad concussion. They thought somebody must have jumped him, beaten him, or shot him multiple times with a pellet gun or something small caliber enough to hurt him but not kill him, or that he'd done it to himself. So, psychiatric observation. He never mentioned pennies to anyone. He told them he didn't remember a thing after heading out for a walk. He filled in a lot of the past for me on that visit. But you know what we talked about, too? We talked about movies. We talked about Mrs. Montez, taught shop class. She was a stand-up comic at night. Something had changed. He didn't seem scared. It used to be, I could feel it even in the emails or the rare message he would leave me. But now in person, in the room, even though his hair was prematurely gray, he seemed like he'd been in some kind of horrible wreck, but he was going to be okay. And he just wanted to leave the hospital and go to McDonald's. I finally said, "I'm glad to see you're calm, man." And he said, "George, you know what? She hasn't come back." I said, "Who?" He said, "You know. She's not coming back. I can feel it." It had only been, 9 days? But he had this sense that she'd burned herself out suddenly. Or that it wasn't that she had attacked him in the woods with the wind and the violence. It was that she was being pulled away from him somehow. And I said, "Yeah, man, I'm sure you're right." I wanted to give him hope. When I left him, he was watching some sitcom, and I thought, if I never see him again, if we just go our separate ways and the link is finally broken, I'm glad that as bad as he looks right now, that he's got that look on his face, like I'd never seen, like it was all over. That day was 17 years ago.
Kingsford. It was good to hear from you. I'm doing well after another ugly procedure on my knee, and I'll be moving in soon with my daughter and her husband. I had an interesting experience last month. I got together with 4 people I went to high school with, the class of '62, now old and gray. We had lunch at a local hangout we all used to go to, which is somehow still there, and we laughed and reminisced. When they asked me about my career, I told them I practiced law, one that hasn't been true since the 90s. But of course I couldn't possibly explain to them what we've been trying to do. I've made a decision which may upset you. I think it's time we released all our files and all our archives to anyone who wants them. The entire database and every communication. There's been enough secrecy and enough subversion. Let the world be shocked for a while, yes, before it realizes how little knowledge we've truly gained in 30 years. We're doing no one any good this way. I want to do good. Agatha, January 30th, 2020.
It's over in this one?
On August 28th of this year, George Fordham went to visit the grave of his high school girlfriend and would-be prom date, Lee King, who had recently passed away after a long illness. They had never spoken after that night in 1993. George, we're no longer best friends if you're not coming to Cornell with me, you bum.
Jack Charbonneau.
I'll miss the back row of Mr. Lilly's class and all the times you cheated at Uno.
Mike Katz.
Always thought you were cute, but not as cute as you think you are.
Donica Bell.
Who will torture the freshmen now? Have a great summer and a great life.
Mark Edelstein.
Thank you for being an awesome cafeteria buddy and for all those lifts home. Sorry about your loss this year. Best of luck at college.
Misha Rhodes.
This is her.
Is there anything you wish you could say to her?
No.
The Fetchus can absorb up to 12 damage points. A player may not have more than one Fetchus in their hand at any time. Because she grows ever stronger until the moment when her strength burns away entirely, she can absorb up to 4 damage in any combat's final round instead of 2. She cannot be chained into combat for at least 1 turn after recruitment into a clan containing either a Lich or Heavenly Sentinel.
August 20th, 2021. Dear George, hi, it's Belle. It was so great to hear from you. I thought I'd take the time to tell you everything that happened since the last time we talked. I can't believe it's been almost 17 years. After Cooper settled back into his routine, he wasn't bothered anymore by the presents.
It was just like he thought. Something had happened. We didn't talk all the time, just gamed online mostly, but I could tell he was so relieved. After a while, we kind of tried to date again, finally, but then things got tougher. He couldn't make any more money from Spectral Core. It had gotten replaced by other things long ago. So he had to find work, and he'd never really had a job before, so that was a tough adjustment. He moved back here, just a few blocks from his old house on Wiggins Road, and got an apartment because I sort of begged him to try. He did different things for a couple of years, but he didn't really like any of them. Then it was more than that. He got more and more sad. I tried to talk to him about it like I always did, but he was pretty closed off. It took me a long time to figure him out, and I needed help to do it. Finally, I got in touch with the man who had done so much research into everything, a guy named Maxwell, and he filled in some pieces. He was very nice and very helpful. By that time, I didn't know if Cooper was going to make it. His depression got real bad, and I just didn't understand. He had this new lease on life, and I didn't get why he didn't see the possibilities. But you have to realize, when what happened to him stopped so suddenly, he lost something, too. Since he was 18, he'd been under its control, which was awful. But for years and years, it was a form of companionship to someone who had none. And it was companionship he didn't have to respond to or return. One time, he told me about a day when he was 25 or so, swimming up at the water park in East Hillside. He liked to scoop up water in his cap and dump it over his head. And this one time, he was standing in the water and he did that, and along with the water, pennies fell out of his cap onto his head, and he laughed. As terrible as what he went through was, when the presents went away without him ever knowing why, it was a different kind of pain. If no one believes that, I believe that. I've been that lonely. He didn't know if maybe he had done something to cause the end, maybe even caused her, yes, I do say her, to reject him. It was the loss of something that had been truly close and predictable and belonged to him. So he had to figure out who he was. He had to find a different identity to be whole. and there really hadn't been much of a Cooper all along to build from. I thought he would disappear or die. I really did. But I never stopped trying with him. That's one thing I've always been good at. Persistence. It's how I got the job in the cash office down at the store. I stayed with him. It took years, but he started to figure out who he was going to be. He found a job that he liked at a golf course, and he stopped shutting down from me. He realized that responding to affection wasn't going to destroy him. Rejection wouldn't either. Guess what? We're still together. I want you to know that when Cooper talks about you, he always talks about the night you let him teach you spectral core. To him, that's a magical memory. He remembers everything you both said to each other and how you drove him home from Cupatello's. That's how simple life can be, I guess. He thinks of you as a great friend. I see from Wikipedia that you gave up acting and anything to do with it a few years ago. So maybe you're trying to figure out who you're going to be next, too. If that's true, I hope it all goes your way. It's never too late. Write us anytime. Belle.
Thank you, Belle. No, not too late. Not even close.